So Anna, you mentioned like Will Eisner and Scott. Were they gonna come or something?
Oh no, we were talking about graphic medicine and
Oh, okay. They're
some authors that you were asking about textbooks that we had here.
That's what it was. Okay. I was thinking, I knew I wrote the wrong reference note to it, so because I was scribbling down while you were talking, and then when I translated it, I think I wrote the wrong thing in the wrong place. So okay.
Got it. Easy fix.
Yep. Okay. Miss Betty is in the house, sometimes known as Sunflower Betty.
Good to see you again, Betty.
Your microphone's off, but
sometimes that's the best way for it to be.
or is it like one of these kind of things? No, you could, it's like, you can talk.
Jose Wences, was that his name?
Yeah.
Mr. Wences. No. We could revert to sign language, but I'm pretty rusty.
Yeah.
It's not a reversion, that's an advancement, actually.
Yeah.
Nice to see you all.
Yeah. Okay, it's now 10:30, so we're going to get started. You are on the South Dakota Humanities Council Brainstorming the Human Connection. And we're going to be talking today about how to translate more information about health to the public in some rather unique ways. And we have with us Anna Simonson, Dr. Anna Simonson, and she's with the Health Sciences and Research Services at the library. I think it's a Health Sciences and Research Services librarian at the Wegner Library, and that's at the University of South Dakota. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you for having me, Lawrence.
And you've seen Peter before, Pete hosting, and he's been with us before if you've been here, but if you haven't, I know if you weren't on that day, you'll be learning some other interesting insights from him too as he joins. Welcome, Pete. So Anna, let's get started by just giving a kind of 50,000 foot view on who Anna is, because when people are talking with someone or interacting, which by the way, this is an interactive program, so we expect people to have ideas and share with us. We'll get started, but we if you have questions or comments or experiences that you feel are relevant to our topic, we invite you to just let us know. You can do that little hand raise thing that they do so well on Zoom. You could put it in the chat, or when you unmute your mic, I can see it, and then that'll give me some idea also that you have something to say, and we'll go from there. But Anna, welcome, and can you start off by telling us who you are, where you came from, and how did you get to the point you are today?
Sure. So again, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. a historian and a librarian at USD, as Lawrence said. And I'm actually from the Sioux Falls area. I'm from southwestern Minnesota, about an hour away. Sioux Falls was the big city growing up. I'm from a little tiny town. But then lived on the East Coast for a long time. I went to graduate school out in New York City and then came back. And after my son was born, I have 3 young children, 4-year-old twins and a 7-year-old. And became interested in the health humanities in a variety of ways over the past couple of years. I did a postdoc fellowship at Sanford Research in population health in 2018 to 2019. And that really got me thinking about health and wellness in a different way. And of course, always as a historian, I've always been interested in the history of medicine, the history of healthcare. But that opened my eyes to new ways of thinking about communities, about the world, about health. And then in 2020, when everything shut down, I decided to go into library science, and I did my master's in library science, and I'm fairly new at USD. So I started full-time in January, and we have a lot of new initiatives that are happening there. And one of them is a health humanities initiative that Dr. Hasing really is at the forefront of at the Stanford School of Medicine, and trying to implement the health humanities into medical education and have more conversations, important conversations about health with the public. And so part of that initiative is that the South Dakota Humanities Council gave us a wonderful grant in the spring that started May 1st to launch this new program called Speaking of Health. And so Dr. Hasing and I are working on this to invite authors in who are going to address topics that relate to health and wellness, kind of under this broad rubric of health humanities, but to invite the public to have these conversations with healthcare professionals, academics, all together. And our first speaker is coming September 15th. So.
Okay, we will get back to the speaker, because I think that's the topic is one that is worth noting, because I think if people just say, oh, if it's a speaker, you know, it doesn't ring, but I think that's a unique opportunity for people. Tell us about what health and humanities is. That's, you know, it's a big, broad, not usual topic.
Yeah, so people will define it in different ways, but I would say very broadly that it is a field that a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary field that draws on, you know, many disciplines, many methodologies, different mediums to kind of center the human experience in healthcare and medicine. And it really grew out of, you know, it's been present for a long time, but as it is today, it grew out of the 1960s and 70s, the patient care movement, the patient rights movement, to kind of recenter the patient and the human within medicine.
Okay, can you just speak a little bit about recentering the human in medicine? I think that's a concept that's worth exploring.
For sure. So yeah, throughout the 20th century, medicine became very focused on the science, right? The scientific way of thinking, the numbers, the facts. And as the field of medicine grew and hospitals grew and for-profit hospitals developed, and all of these new technologies came out, the person being treated, many people argued, were kind of left behind, right? It was more about the disease than the person, more interest in the science to treat the disease than the person. And so, you know, a lot of disciplines, if a new discipline develops or a new field develops, it often comes out of a social need. And the health humanities was a response in large part to this kind of decentering of the human being in healthcare. And
Well, you know, one of the things that struck me in that discussion, and I think it's a very important one about refocusing the human being, is again, we're focusing a lot on the practitioner, even if we're not on the tool, because the underlying problem, and one of the reasons that it started, I think medicine started going toward the scientific. In other words, there's signs and there's symptoms, and then there are things that you measure, and there are things that the patient tells you. And I think medicine started to move away from what the patient was saying, because they discovered that often that the patient is an unreliable historian. You know, either they don't want to say what's actually going on with them, often because of embarrassment. Sometimes it's because they don't have the words, right? In other words, if you don't know what the word for liver is, it's hard to say my liver, you know, or something about, or it is hard for the doctor to say something about your liver when you don't know what the liver is, let alone what the liver does. And you don't have there isn't the mutual vocabulary to talk about it. But even more important, I think, is that when the patient is unable to say, for various reasons, what's even bothering them. And so you're almost left with, okay, what can we test and have mutually verifiable? And the next doctor can come in, look at those numbers, test again if they want to, and get the same thing or some deviation, but we can understand it. Whereas if the patient tells the doctor something, the new doctor comes in, which often happens, and they say something different, or the doctor hears it different, that's a little bit weak when you're going to be making a major decision about that person's health. I don't know.
Yeah,
Have you
I
seen
mean,
that kind of thing?
beings complicate things. They are reliable narrators, right? When we tell our own stories, no one's going to tell, you know, if my mother came on the show and told about me, it would be a different story than what I just said, right? You know, I mean, nothing major, but everyone has their own story. And I think, when you look at disease, you know, what medicine has become a very goal-oriented, you know, either treat it or it's not, or not. And the human story doesn't do anything for that goal, right? But we do know from research that empathy and communication between the practitioner and the patient does actually affect outcomes.
Yes.
It affects the well-being of both the patient and the practitioner. And the health humanities really centers around this idea that this is something that helps everybody and does actually provide better outcomes in the long run. So it is a part of that goal, even if it doesn't look like it. Listening to a person, taking the time, and that's another thing. There isn't any time, right? People come in, it's fast because it's goal oriented, it's money driven. But it does matter, and it does actually affect the outcome when you take the time to listen to somebody, whether or not they're giving you correct information, right?
Well, I think again, it goes back. One of the important things as far as the humanities part is that ability to communicate. You know, that is one of the problems to me, is like fundamental, but we don't see it in medicine. We don't talk about it in medicine. I mean, we talk about bedside manner and stuff like that,
Right.
but we don't talk about it from the patient's point of view. How do we get the patient to be able to better communicate what they feel their medical complaint is?
That would
Yeah.
be a great study, Lawrence. I think you just hit on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's understudied. How do you help the patient communicate things that they haven't gone to college to study, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
So,
yeah. Or even just their own feelings, maybe they don't have to have the let's say the Greek and Latin terms for what, all of the things, or have a medical degree or something to be able to explain it, but just to have the words to say how to describe pain, for example. There are different kinds of pain, and those different kinds of pain is very important when you're trying to assess the patient.
right.
But if
Yeah.
they don't seem to be able to explain the kind of pain and the quality of pain.
Yeah. In the health humanities, I think that word is really interesting, pain, because in the health humanities, this is the kind of split between experience and science, where pain is what is happening to the body and suffering is what is happening to the person. And when you're talking about pain, you have to talk about, and you really have to talk about both. That's what the health humanities is trying to do, and what people are trying to do in this discipline or in this field, to connect those things, to make a more holistic experience and improve outcomes in that way.
Excellent. I want to get Pete in on this conversation, because I know he's done some work in Africa with medicine and healing and the arts, as well as / humanities. So, Pete, what's your reaction to the conversation that we've had so far about the whole point of health and humanities?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that you center on communication, which is one of the major issues that health humanists are dealing with. Dr. Danielle Ofri wrote a wonderful book called What Patients Say, What Doctors Hear, that deals with that gap in sort of how that communication is perceived. And it's interesting to sort of even back up from that exam room interaction to think about the ways that we record different kinds of data. So one of the things that Anna mentioned along the way is that we're capturing different kinds of information now in different ways than maybe at the beginning of the 20th century, and that's changed over time. But in the process, somewhere we decided that quantitative information will be privileged, and that's, I think, part of the disconnect that humanists and humanistic social scientists are trying to sort of bring back into the picture.
Excuse me. Can you explain a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so like charts are a good example. There's a kind of information that ends up in a medical chart which is almost illegible to the layperson, right? And makes a lot of sense to physicians. They're trained to compose that information, they're trained to read that information, but it captures a really particular kind of mostly quantitative data that's used in a patient care process. And so even if we sort of devise other ways of communicating and thinking about communication in the exam room, we still lack a diversity of ways to capture other kinds of information. And when I say qualitative information, I'm talking about the kinds of things that you mentioned, Lawrence, where patient feelings, even physician visceral responses to particularly challenging ethical conundra, or just to the human difficulty of observing suffering on the level that physicians routinely do. We kind of lack robust ways to collect and use that information. So some health humanists, including physicians who are health humanists, are have begun to work on different ways of thinking about that, capturing that information, and using that. One of the things that we're doing in the med education curriculum is to think about that challenge, and then think about the ways in which we ask students to write about their clinical experiences. So we're reviving a program that had a longer history in the Sanford School of Medicine called the Med Writers Series, which was an ad hoc sort of opt-in informal writing group, where both students and physicians would write reflectively on their clinical experiences. It is possible to do that in a way that still protects PHI, right? It still protects people's private information by anonymizing qualitative data. But it can be a really important way for people to step outside their exam room experience and think about all of those other kinds of information that are not captured in the chart that nevertheless might be really important to caring for the human, not just caring for a body, right? Because we all have these meat suits we ride around in, and they're important, and all the data that help us describe what's happening in them is important, but ultimately they are not us, are they?
No. Well, you'd be hard pressed to convince some people of that, but yes, I agree. Okay, one of the things that this conversation brings up to me is an interaction I had with my physician many years ago. And when I first started going to him, he had a chart of the human body on his wall that he used to explain to people what he was talking about. In other words, if he was saying the liver, he could point to the liver and say, okay, this part, and if a certain part you had a cancer in that, he can say this part up here is where we find the liver, or this thing behind the liver, this other thing on the pullout, that thing is affecting your liver. And he did what he thought was important to explain what it is that he felt was going wrong and what he was trying to do to correct it. Some years afterwards, I noticed that he didn't have the chart anymore. And I asked him, what happened to your chart? He said, there are a lot of people who, my patients, expressed that they were really grossed out by the chart, so I just took it down. So I guess I say that to say, yes, we need to be training the physicians, but I'm thinking, well, we need to be training the patients too, because the patients have 50% investment in this deal, because communication is always 50-50.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering too, like, would any of you have any insights as to what you might do, what we might do to better prepare patients to have a communication with the doctor, instead of saying, well, the doctor has to learn to communicate with the patient. Yeah, that's true. That's important. But how about the patient learning to communicate with the doctor? How is that? Would you say that's a thing, or, am I just?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my work in East Africa, there's an old, well-rehearsed phrase about people dancing their disease, which is a way of patient training in a sense, that encourages people to express the things that only the sufferer can express, really demonstratively, and to be invested in that process on a level that is really pretty different from anything we've seen here. And yet I do think there are some folks working in narrative medicine, and some like patient support groups are really good at this, right? At encouraging people to describe what it is they're going through, and to deal with all of the things that happen outside the exam room that are nevertheless important to especially kind of protracted projects of well-being, like if you have a rare form of blood cancer that you're likely to live with for decades at a time, well, that has all kinds of implications for social determinants and economic determinants of on your health that may or may not have anything to do with what's happening between you and your physician, right? That may have implications for your need to develop a living will, or your need to have particular kinds of conversations with your family, or your need to plan financially for your care, or all these kinds of things that sometimes those patient support groups are really good at educating patients to deal with, because it's patient to patient interaction that brings in expertise from the medical community, from the legal community, from elsewhere. So I do think there's some of that happening, but I don't think that's the end of it. And I hear what you're saying about sort of thinking about other ways in which that kind of thing could and maybe should happen.
I think that's a really important point too, Lawrence. And but I think it's kind of an unfair playing field that right, academics and physicians. I mean, physicians, they hold the power in the exam room, right? And academics they want their voices heard and have plenty of opportunities to do that, and to learn those skills and to practice, communicating. But one of the things that we were hoping for with this new series, Speaking of Health, it is public facing. And I think more opportunities where the community joins in with professionals in the field in these kind of informal conversations will improve that patient communication, right? So we hope the public comes to these events and asks questions and meets people, maybe even their doctor will be there, right? In these scenarios that don't happen very often, right? And we really want to improve on that. And I really do think that I mean, one of our main goals is that will improve the communication, not just in one way, not just the physician communication, but the patient communication.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you underscored the concept that it is an unfair playing field. It's slanted, and my interest would be, how do we balance it out? How do we, physicians train for years, many years, sometimes from high school, to be able to do the things they do. But where are we giving the ordinary person the ability to, should they need it, be able to express what is going on with them? Even so far as like paying attention to them. One of the things that people mention is when you go to a physician, especially the first time, the physician is trying to create what they would refer to as a baseline. In other words, the person came, this is where their quote, in air quotes, normal is. But many people don't know that because they don't pay attention to what's happening with their bodies until something goes wrong. And that's not their baseline, So if we were to have as part of our culture, the idea that we pay attention to everything from whether I'm hungry or what my stool looks like, and to know that there are things that you can tell from the stool and from your urine sample that you take every day, maybe 2 or 3 times a day, that you should be paying attention to that. And if you notice this thing, maybe you ought to pay more attention to your diet or call a physician, because that's completely unnormal. If we don't have that kind of baseline knowledge, I think it hampers the physician, because they have to make a lot of guesses, and in lieu of the guesses, they do the test that we're saying that they just gets too many numbers, and is it really a thing? Did that resonate with you guys at all, or how do you respond?
Oh no, I do think it resonates a lot. And 2 things came to mind. Is one, I think physicians are around all sorts of things that people who are not in the healthcare field find embarrassing or gross, or, and, they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about their stool. They don't want to, mention these things because it's embarrassing. And so finding, opportunities to have conversations to make, cultural shift takes a long time, right? And I don't know that that will ever not be embarrassing, but to work with that, to say, yes, this is embarrassing, but I can still talk about it, I think would be a huge step. And also health literacy, health information that gets delivered to patients is, and I can't remember the exact statistic off the top of my head, but the level at which those like pamphlets and brochures are written is higher than the reading and comprehension level of most people who are being handed those documents. And so I think there are a lot of ways that that patient communication can be enhanced. And this field is working towards that goal. But
can you talk a little bit about that? Because you have a program, speaking of health, and you're trying to address some of that. Can you talk to us about that program?
Yeah, well, at its core, we wanted to have a space where we could invite the public to have conversations about health, important conversations about health, where healthcare professionals were also present. And, not talks that were going to be, about the science and the numbers, right? Conversations that matter to people on the ground in their daily lives. So our first guest, Mara Bookbinder, is a professor of social medicine at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she wrote a book. Her most recent one is called Scripting Death, Stories of Assisted Dying in America. And she is coming to talk about that book. I mean, we all are going to face the end of our life, right? But it's not a conversation that people necessarily want to have or have very often or talk about really with their doctors when they go in, right? But we want to have these conversations. Palliative care is a critical component for almost everybody is going to, need palliative care at some point in their lives. And so opening up these spaces to have these conversations, I think hopefully our goal is that this will improve overall healthcare and the health and well-being of South Dakotans. And then, so we'll have 2 more speakers coming after that, but Mara's coming on September 15th. And we would love for just a flood of people from the public to show up at Wegner Library at 6 p.m. on that day.
Can you put in the chat the dates and times and places and all of that, so and where people can get more information about what it is that you're trying to do with that program? It would be great if people, maybe it's a bit of a ways to come from Rapid City or Lemon or something like that, or but they often have relatives, even if they disown them, they have relatives that could benefit from from going. So I would like to see us put the word out that's a good program to go to share with people. I want to open it up to our audience. I would say more esteemed panelists, the people who are also on this call. If any of you have any questions or insights or examples, something you want to add to this conversation. Miss Betty is known as Sunflower Betty now.
Well, I'll jump right in here. This is a wonderful program. Speaking of health, I am a generation where our mothers didn't even say the word pregnant. And now we are to, thankfully, a place where elementary and preschool children are being taught to say the proper names of their body parts and talk about them frankly to each other and to their parents. It's awkward for some of us, but it's a lot less awkward doing it that way than it has been growing up and trying to find my own vocabulary so that I can speak comfortably with my friends, my family, and especially my care providers. So I really am looking forward to what you're going to do with this Speaking of Health. I also wanted to mention that when you talked about how to make it easier for patients to express themselves or for their physicians to hear what they're saying, when I became old enough for Medicare several years ago now, and as most of us do, I availed myself of the requisite physical exam. And I was so lucky to have happened onto a PA who allowed at least an hour. And I think maybe we were an hour and a half in my initial visit with her. And she put me totally at ease. She just listened and listened and listened. And so now, some 10 years or more later, I think we've helped each other. And I thought that was very meaningful when you said it helps both sides to be able to communicate better. So that's enough said at this point, I think. Thank you for doing this program.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very wonderful program that has the potential to change a lot of things just in the pivot point that, you know, you pivot even just a little bit, and then down the road, this is going to have huge implications. Anyone else have anything that they want to add to the conversation? Misty? Misty, did you have something?
I'm trying. I have to click that button a few times before it works.
Okay.
It's a great program. Thank you so much. I've just been absorbing all of it. I think too, just with the shortages that we're seeing in the medical field, that's creating a need for this now more than ever. My daughter was hospitalized last week, completely unexpected, and it went a certain direction, but you can see where there's just maybe the lack of communication between the doctors. You can see where they're stretched thin themselves. And you can see where maybe a sociologist comes in and they fill a certain role because they seem like they're the closest thing that we have to what you're describing, is maybe we'll just get them and they're kind of the Band-Aid, throw them in there, and we'll see if we can fix this a little bit because this and this and this happened and this shouldn't have happened this way. So it's people come in. I think we're in a world where expectations are higher than ever before, and the pressure on doctors and patients' expectations are higher, and the pressure on the doctors and expectations on them are higher, and that doesn't align. How do we fill those gaps? And I think we're full of gaps. And that doesn't make people bad people. It's just the system and how do we fix it? And I think this is really, really a valid area. I'm very interested and encouraged to see that there are people like you, Pete and Anna, taking a hold of this and saying, what can we do with this and what needs to happen, and trying to come up with these programs to get, like you said, initiatives to get this started, because there is a definite need for it.
Thank you, Misty. Anyone else have something they want to add, questions they have? Okay, well, keep thinking about them, and then we'll come back to it. Anna, you have one of the initiatives you have anyway is trying to get people to use graphics to have a conversation that maybe they can't have with words. Maybe it's about feelings, maybe it's about a part of the body or something, or a condition, or maybe using graphics to sort of work out in a person's mind, like, you know, what's happening with me. Can you talk about the use of graphics?
Yeah,
in medicine?
absolutely. Yeah, so there's a small field that's gaining more and more traction called graphic medicine. And I'll be teaching a class on this, and not this year, but the following year at USD. But graphic medicine is a field that is attempting to use comics and pictures to improve healthcare communication, health literacy. So many of the graphic novels that you'll see are written as memoirs about somebody's experience with their illness. And, you know, sometimes seeing these pictures rather than reading a memoir about them, that's just text, it conveys things in a way that you just simply can't do with words alone. So much can be done with a picture, not to mention the therapeutic act of drawing and, you know, creating art. Art is a large part of the health humanities. And so I just got back from a conference, the Graphic Medicine Conference, and met with all of these amazing scholars who are trying to incorporate drawing and comics and graphic novels into the medical field as a way to improve communication and understanding on both the physician and the patient side.
I think that that'll be a very worthwhile program. And I get that you are in a year or two or somewhere in there, you'll be starting to teach this. But can you give, since there was a conference, I'm going to guess that it wasn't something that you decided over coffee last week. Tell me what's being done in that field now. Where can we find examples of people using the graphic arts in medicine?
Great question. So Penn State does a lot of the publishing in graphic medicine right now. Two of the new books that just came out, one is called Clinical Ethics, and it's a book that uses panel comics to present scenarios to people who are either studying bioethics or are in medical school, or whoever wants to whoever's interested in this, and then follows it up with questions. So rather than having them read dense text about bioethics, it's a comic strip scenario that you can see the facial expressions, you can pick up on the colors that the artist uses, you can pick up on all sorts of different things that aren't available in text. So things that are actually going to be used in medical education are coming out. Also, there's more and more classes being introduced into medical schools that involve graphic medicine. So a lot of instructors were at this conference. Getting medical students, I should emphasize, I should have done this at first, you do not have to be an artist to participate in graphic medicine. I am not an artist, but getting medical students to draw out scenarios or issues that they're having, or it's been shown that a lot of things have been revealed. Someone was writing about graphic medicine and says it's kind of becoming the canary in the coal mine, right? So you'll see these graphics that med students have drawn and realize a problem that you didn't necessarily know existed. You find something that is a problem in medical education that can be improved. Lots of graphic novels coming out in young adult literature about illness, experiencing illness as a kid. A new one about public health, using graphics to inform the public, that just came out a couple of months ago. And I mean, so it's really varied, and but just a fascinating field that I think actually is very effective at incorporating the public into discussions of healthcare.
One of the things that, oh, go ahead, Pete.
Well, you said two things there that I think are worth highlighting, Anna. One is the mention of Penn State, which has got one of the oldest medical humanities programs in the country. So their book series on graphic medicine, I put a link to that in the chat, as well as a link to graphicmedicine.org. And then the other is that graphic medicine, like so many other components of medical humanities, is often focused on getting not just med students, but any kind of readers or consumers of medical humanities literature engaged in really complex topics that are tough to parse through like topics in medical ethics, right? The entire humanities track of the ethics and humanities faculty grew out of the Med Education Committee's desire to examine as deeply as we possibly can in the space of a given medical education, the complex issues of medical ethics. And we have an ethics certificate program, but the health humanities piece of that is a specific track now that we're developing, and it is often focused around ethical issues in medicine.
You know, one of the things that comes to mind when you say that, Pete, is that one of the things that let's say makes it difficult to talk about these subjects are the words themselves. Because when we think about how words work, I not only have to have the word, but you have to have the word if I'm talking to you, and we have to have an agreement on what the word means. Most of us do not look up most of the words that we use every day. So the communication gets muddied and the words actually get in the way. So it just seems like a lot of things that we think are complicated would not be complicated if there were pictures involved. You know, if there were other ways that we use to illustrate the concept and the idea, instead of not only saying it, you know, the words get all jumbled, but also we're saying it in Greek and Latin half the time when we get to medicine. So it's like we already overcomplicate the already complicated. So it just seems to me that a lot of the ideas and concepts, once a person has the 50,000-foot view, they can orient their mind about that subject, and it's not complicated at all. You know, it's like I meet people who think that they can't do lab work, but they cook. You're doing lab work in the kitchen, you know what I mean? And you're measuring things, you understand, you know, like the importance of more or less precise measurements, or at least having the concept of what the ingredients do when you mix them together. That's fundamental science. That's what we do, you know? So
Yeah,
I think we just make it more complicated with the words.
well, I like what you're saying, that there are some media that can sort of transcend language in that way. And yet not to contradict you, but just looking at maybe the other side of that coin is that, you know, one of the things that we routinely do in health humanities is try to get okay with some of the ambiguities that are just going to be there. Yes. Right, where people can have different perspectives on a particular issue in health humanities or medical ethics, and that's just the way it is, and that's okay. It happens that folks who are steeped in science all day every day sometimes have a really tough time with that, right? They want to see things as black and white. They want to have a concrete solution to a problem, and people who work in humanities fields aren't as accustomed to black and white all the time, right? There's a good bit of ambiguity that we just live with all the time, and that's a valuable contribution that we can make in health humanities is finding the descriptive language and finding the methods to deal with ambiguity.
I think we do. I don't think we're disagreeing. I think the scientists have a different objective, or the doctor, the people who deal with the prescriptions. What they're looking for is repeatable, dependable results. When we deal with humanities, we don't think about that so much. We think about more big picture things, and we're able to talk to that one-on-one person. But I don't think we even value trying to make the outcomes the same every time. The sciences, part of the scientific method is repeatability. That's key. It's like if I do something and it works one time out of 100, that's not a thing. If I do something that works 9 times that's more of a thing, but 99 times I'm going with that, right? I don't think we come at the humanities from that angle. We don't have this need to be repeatable.
Yeah. So this is something I really want to commend Anna for doing, is that she has structured this series so that we're starting with an issue that we know has a really wide range of divergent perspectives. I mean, death can be a highly controversial topic in many ways and for many reasons. And she structured this series so that we're diving in on precisely those topics that are that way, right? Death, surgery, things where the ambiguity is going to be rife, and we know that on the way in. And that's a great opportunity to invite people into conversation with those divergent perspectives and to see what happens from there.
So that, and all of that's valuable. I think that's what we're all saying here, is that all of those different approaches are valuable and critical for the whole, to deal with the whole person and the whole society. We need to come at it from all those different angles. Anyone else, by the way, have any other, we're kind of past our 3/4 point here. Anybody else have any other questions or comments, experiences that they've had? Okay.
Lawrence?
Go ahead,
Lawrence.
Jace.
Yeah, this is Jace. I think the idea of art and healing is really, really key to young people and to the young patients. A lot of our native students, native kids are very artistic, and that's not stereotypical. They just seem to be, very, very expression. They can express themselves in drawing things. And I found that opens a communication when you're counseling or working with young people, that they can draw out what is ailing them or what is helping them. So communication, I think, is the main thing here. In Lakota thought, our medicine people tell us that the first step in healing is asking for help. And sometimes people are afraid to ask, or they don't know how to ask for help, or they are in fear of finding out what may be the truth, and afraid of getting healed, if you will. But the first step on the road to healing is certainly, again, what we've been talking about, is better communication between the medical care provider and the patient, the medicine man and the young person or the old person is trying to stay alive. So I think communication, it all comes down to communication. And Betty, I think, does a lot of stuff with healing art, don't you, Betty?
Yeah.
I guess I don't think of it that way, Jace, very often. I just do it because it's good for me. And I'm so grateful that other people enjoy what I do. So it's a way of bringing people together to look at things, to talk about things. Thank you.
Jace, I want to go back to something you were saying about the young people and the expressions and their need to say more, as a matter of health, actually. Would you have any ideas of like what could be done to help young people to be more expressive? I was at an event last night, and mostly Native kids. In fact, it was a Native kids program that they were using poetry and also music, and they had actually made art out of it. So they had a gallery and stuff like that. But one of the things I noticed is how one word is shy, but another word is like, there was a certain sort of like doubt as to whether even talking about what I think is important. And then you could see the change as those kids got support for their feelings. You could just see the change in their body language and how they reacted. I'm just wondering if in your experience, you found ways that the rest of us could use to support young people?
I think you hit it on the head there, where a lot of the programs now that are working with young people are indeed poetry, dance, music, but we already have dance and music and drumming and all that. And why not tap into that and use that in a way that is indicative of healing? And we think that that's just a way of life. That's what we do, and that's what we enjoy. But it can be, and it can be expressed by young people to how they feel, and also how they can be healed. Sometimes we don't. It's just right in front of us. We don't see that powwow dancing is a part of healing, but it is, and it's a way of young people expressing, like you said, expressing themselves, and or not being able to. Sometimes we don't have the ability to be able to do those physical things that are required of dancing and so forth. But I think you hit it on the head. I'm so excited to see these young people that are expressing themselves in other ways that are typically shy or typically very reserved. But if you tap into that passion that they happen to be good at or enjoy, then they can communicate with you, and they can express themselves in a real very, sometimes really dynamic and kind of scary too to some of us elders.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, and that's okay though. That's all right. I'm just excited about the series. I'm excited about how people can talk about healing. I think that's what we should be doing, helping and encouraging one another to be whole people in all the areas, not only physically, but mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. That's be a whole person, as well as a doctor being a whole person too.
Sure, exactly. Well, one thing I would throw in there also is, as a role for older people, is as the resources, because often people don't, they haven't been alive as long, so they may not have seen as many things. For example, one of the kids, he did a kind of, he did a rap piece that he had put together. And then at the end, there was some discussion about, where he wanted to go with it. And he said, well, I wanted to do this. I want to put an 808 on it, but I don't have an 808. And I'm thinking, yes, you do, because you just showed me your phone. Your phone has an 808 on it, but he didn't know that. Okay. So in that same way, in a much broader sense, you don't need to know what an 808 is. It's about music, but it's, we have some resources that we may even take for granted, but being positioned, so one, that if the young person has wanted to do something, they feel it's okay to come to us, and they don't feel it's, like a bother or demeaning or something like that. But also to position ourselves to go out and find out stuff so that we can be the resource for those young people. We're getting in close to the end of our program time here. Anna and Pete, are there some closing thoughts that you would have? I think we have some stuff in the chat, by the way. If you haven't been watching, there are some links in there that people should take advantage of and copy and paste. But go ahead, Anna.
Well, I just love that word healing. So I kept thinking, as Jace was talking about, that's another word where you have these slight, the slight shift where, you can heal without being able to cure, right? So, and that's what the Health Humanities focuses on, that important kind of different way of looking at it, right? You can have an incurable disease and still dance and paint or do something in another way that is healing. As we have said in this session, we're more than our physical bodies. And so I love that word healing. And I think it's just a core component. And I was also thinking about children and art because it's one of those things that is inexplicably kind of taken away from adults, right? As we get older, where if a child goes to therapy, oftentimes they're asked to draw. It's not the words. How do you explain some of these hard feelings? And so art is such a core thing that for some reason we don't draw on as often as we should as adults for in the realm of health. And so I really hope that starts to shift. And I think it is. I think it is that many people are focused on it.
Excellent. Pete, did you have any parting thoughts?
I just want to remind folks to come and join us for Speaking of Health as this series gets off the ground. Dr. Mara Bookbinder will be with us September 15th at 6 p.m. In the Wegner Health Sciences Library. And if you want to see the rest of the series, you can sure see that link. It's posted in the chat here, and it's also the chat will go away when this call ends, but if you want to get back to that information later, you can also see the South Dakota Humanities Council Facebook page, and all of those same links are posted there. So the LibGuide on the Wegner Health Sciences Library page that details the entire series is there, and we'll continue to post information as it comes available on that page. So please come and join us.
Excellent, excellent. Well, this brings us pretty much to our close for this program. I want to thank both Anna and Pete for joining us and sharing these ideas. And I think that they're very important ideas that we can take, not just what we learned here about health and arts and the humanities, but also to have a ripple effect in terms of how we look at our lives. What are we doing in terms of seeing our own humanity and our health as a kind of one thing? How is it integrated? How is our humanity supportive of our health? And that's a key thing that we didn't get into, but it's critical. The more human we are, oddly, the healthier we can be. A lot of our problems are really stress issues or, anger issues and things like that manifest as health issues, but they're really humanities issues. So I'm hoping that all of us will take the opportunity to go and see some of these programs. And then when as you talk to your friends and relatives, to bring these subjects up for something to talk about. You don't have to be a specialist in it, but just see what people think. Just bring them up, and you can do something worthwhile with that instead of just banter. Not that I'm all against banter, but there are some other things that we can do. With that said, thanks everybody. We'll see you next week, same time, same station.
Thanks.